residents and teachers and parents can say, hey, school district, what are you doing? Where are we? How healthy, how unhealthy are there? And it's really easy to figure out if your classrooms are healthy or not. There are definitely pockets around our state and our country that understand that our kids are different and they have different needs. We have promised our teachers that if they get certified, we give them stipends. And we have not fully met that promise. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, but we got to fight that because public education is one of the cornerstones of our republic.
Good morning, Representative Millett. Thank you so much for joining us at Education Action Forum of Maine today.
Good morning, and it's terrific to be here. I'm thrilled that you guys are interested in education and motivated and want to show up, and that just is awesome. So, yeah.
Fantastic. If you could introduce where you're from and also just the role of the Ed Committee.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I'm Rebecca Millett. I represent House District 30, which is most of Cape Elizabeth. And I am a long-term member of the Education and Cultural Affairs Committee. I've been on it now, I'm going into my 10th year. And I have been Senate Chair for 4 of those years. But I'm just delighted to be able to dive deeply into education, higher education, early education issues, my whole legislative career. It's fantastic.
So maybe we could just start with what your priorities are for this legislative session.
Sure. At first, it's important to establish that this year is the short session of the 130th legislature. Each legislature lasts for 2 years, and last session in 2021 was the long session where any legislator can put in as many bills as they want about anything, and nobody can say no, except maybe the revisers if they say it's a duplicate bill or something like that. This session, all of our bills that are new have to be approved by the Legislative Council, which is leadership of both chambers, both parties. So we have a lot less new bills. We're supposed to wrap up our business sometime in late April, I believe. And we meet, and so people say, well, why are you even meeting? Well, we in Maine are required to balance our budget by our Constitution. So every year we have to meet and rebalance it. As folks may know, we actually have a higher level of revenue than we projected. So we have to go back and figure out how we're going to deal with all of that. So having said that, the Education and Cultural Affairs Committee did carry over a few bills, no more than 10. And then we have a lot of report backs from the Department of Education and some other organizations. We had a few new bills. I would say most of them are fairly technical in nature, not really big picture kind of stuff, which is appropriate because we don't have the time to deal with something new that would be big picture. But having said that, there are a number of things that are coming back to us that are big picture. And top of my mind is the child development services issue. Child development services deals with education from birth to age 4. I can still never quite get that right. And it has literally been languishing ever since I've been on the committee. It's been underfunded. We have wait lists, which is against the law. And it's really been struggling due to some pretty significant neglect, I would say both from the executive branch and the legislative branch. So we have had underway for the past 4 years a conversation around where should these services lie and what should they look like. And so that is all coming back to us this session. Hopefully the Department of Education, with the consultation of an advisory committee of stakeholders, will have ready for us a plan for how to proceed. The focus there's two separate bills. One bill is to deal with Part C, which is the birth to 2-year-olds. We call it Part C cradle. That one's not terribly controversial, but everyone pretty much agrees where that should lie, except some in the weeds kind of stuff about how it probably should stay a separate quasi-government agency and not be folded into the Department of Education, because you need somebody to oversee the work. And if you have it in your own department, then that doesn't work.
Right.
Then the tougher nut is the older kiddos, Part B. A number of years ago, the department said they want to move those services into our public schools.
Mhm.
Most states in the United States do it that way. We were one of the rare ones that didn't, but there was a lot of question about, well, are you now going to make property taxes cover those expenses that used to be 100% paid for by the state? What are the control mechanisms, the quality control mechanisms? What's the time frame? How do you know, huge questions.
Mm.
We eventually hired an outside third party to come in and develop a plan to help us wrap our heads around what would that look like. And now hopefully the department is using that plan to put something concrete together for us to consider. That was a very long answer because it is really complex and really high stakes, because we all know these ages are when it's most important to invest in our kids. It's most important to get it right. And so we have really put the brakes on to say, we're going to take this slowly, we're going to take this seriously, and we need to dot our I's and cross our T's before we say yes to anything. So that's coming back to us, and it's a big deal.
Mm. I
Um,
did hear in a conversation a couple of weeks ago with Lori LaChance, the president of Thomas College, heard her say the very same words. The topic of the conversation was investment, and she ended the conversation by saying that these early years are the very most important for children, but they're also the most impactful in terms of investment. So it's interesting to hear you echo those words.
it's true. And I would say that when I arrived in the Senate 8 years ago, not everybody understood that and accepted that. I give a lot of credit to the stakeholders, um, Ready Nation, Maine Children's Alliance, Maine Association for Young Children. All of them have really done an amazing job of helping to educate my colleagues and others around the state, including businesses. And we have the Children's Caucus now, because we recognize that we're re-electing or electing people every 2 years, and so we really need to make sure that this understanding stays firm as we now try to mobilize resources to really, walk the talk at this point.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
so that is one of my priorities. The other one is something that's been tabled in the Appropriations and Financial Affairs Committee, which relates to National Board certification. We have promised our teachers that if they get certified, we give them stipends, and we have not fully met that promise. And so, the governor did put money into her budget last session to pay them fully for what we promised, but there's language in statute that doesn't guarantee that going forward. And so I put a bill in to just make sure that our nationally board certified teachers don't get forgotten again. And so I'm hoping that we can now get that out of the appropriations committee and passed and done with. Another priority of mine, it's not pure education, but it is really part of the jigsaw puzzle that I've gotten very involved with, which is childcare. And I have a bill around tax credits for our childcare providers, the owners, the directors, the teachers, and businesses who help families pay for childcare. And it also addresses child care tax credits for families. That's already been there, but we're going to try to beef it up a little bit. So I'm really excited about this. It's going to be a bit of a heavy lift this session because it is kind of a big policy bill. I know how hard it is to mess around with tax policy, a lot of politics involved. But I really, at this point in my public service, understand that programs that appropriate additional funding for particular areas of public policy can be pulled as easily as given, right? From administration to administration, from economic situation to economic situation. Tax policy is a lot more rigid. It gets embedded, and then people are really loath to go in there and mess around. So, from my thinking, we can put in these tax credits. They stay there. It's a stable source of funding for folks that are hanging on by their fingernails or walking away in record numbers and just saying, I can't do this anymore, which is heartbreaking. And, we all know the pandemic has laid bare what those of us who've been in this policy area for a while know, which is childcare is part of our infrastructure. And we're losing a lot of women in particular because of these fault lines in our childcare ecosystem. So that's one that's really a priority and I'm really excited about. And then the last one is a little controversial still, unfortunately, which is to get representation of faculty, adjunct faculty, and staff onto boards of trustees of our public higher education institutions. Last year, I introduced a bill for having them be voting. We passed it in the legislature, and the governor vetoed it. In her veto letter, she expressed concern around conflict of interest, despite the fact the Attorney General had ruled that there was no conflict of interest. Okay, government said we equal branches, so I listened and I put a bill in to make them non-voting. And so I'm really determined to make sure that their professional understanding, expertise, and experience is part of the conversation. Right now, it's not happening. And so that's a big priority of mine this session.
Thank you so much. So I heard four, and I want to go back to the very first one just for a moment and say, if this were to go forward in the way that you have envisioned it in your mind, what would the outcome be? What would Maine people notice would be different?
Well, the services would be managed through their school departments for the Part B children, which hopefully would lead to no wait lists, that perhaps better responsiveness, and then the transition from Part B into pre-KK hopefully would be more seamless, and possibly we could avoid heavy, costly pulling out services for these kiddos and allow them to stay in their classrooms, ideally.
Okay, thank you. Are there, other than these four legislative priorities that you have for this session, is there anything kind of on the horizon, or maybe it's something that you couldn't bring up this session, but you feel is out there and people should know about and be thinking about, considering for the future?
Yeah, I think everybody knows about it, but we really need all hands on deck because we've known about it in the education committee. I don't know, 4, 6 years, 8 years, maybe even all the way back around workforce shortages in our schools, right? The pandemic again has laid bare something that we saw happening, and it has just magnified it beyond anything we could have imagined. Bus drivers, substitutes, special education teachers, foreign language teachers, math and science teachers. We've got some serious issues about coaxing, encouraging, convincing young people that a career in public education is worthwhile. I put in legislation 6 years ago to up the teacher starting salary. It had been at $30,000 forever and ever. $30,000. And fortunately, the governor in her first budget after she was elected did include increasing teacher salaries. Um, it's been ratcheting up over a number of years, so it didn't just immediately go from 30 to 40. But I think we're pretty close, if not already there. But I will say 40, $40,000 for highly educated professionals, right? Like they have huge amounts of debt, having gone to school to get the right certification background to be an educator. So that actually feeds into a topic we are going to be dealing with this session around certification of teachers. We've been working on that issue for 4 years now. There's a desire in some parts of our society that say we need to make it much easier to be a teacher. It's just too hard. I'm very cautious about that because, again, this is when you really need to get it right, and not anybody can be a teacher. But I do understand that if there are people with, especially high school level science and math, who want to be a teacher, we should be able to encourage them, not too many put any obstacles in front of them, but yet recognizing that there's a pedagogy there. Right? It's not just what's in your head, knowledge about the topic. It's how you convey that and how you encourage the love of that in your students. And I will say that with my twins, I certainly have experienced not a lot, but several educators who really lacked that. They were really smart, really knew their stuff, but they didn't understand that second part of it. And then there were others who were brilliant at both, and we felt like you hit the jackpot. So we have to try to figure out how to encourage more young people to get into the pipeline, and how to encourage others in their professions to maybe consider being teachers. um, this pandemic has not helped, and the way teachers are being treated by our society, and the kind of risks that they have been expected to take in order to be an educator, I think is just amped up how more challenging it's going to be to try to keep our rank and file. That's not right. That's not a good word, but our educators not running away and getting new ones in.
Do you see any particular avenues for solutions? Maybe not the solutions themselves, but kind of areas to look into specifically to kind of remove some of these obstacles, or to encourage the people who will be the best teachers in the main schools?
I think there are avenues. I don't think any one of them solves the problem. I think they're all each incremental. And so, as with most things in life, you have to take a real comprehensive approach and not just say, oh, we're going to pass this bill and everything's going to be fine. It's like, no, pass this bill along with this and this and this and this, or put them all into one bill and say, this is our education workforce bill. But it's been pretty hard to get people's attention, hold their attention, and make the investment. Like, our Republican colleagues did not vote for the teacher salary increase. And you just kind of have to shake your head and go, seriously? Like, so it becomes a little political, but there are other aspects. So I actually just received an email from some folks, gosh, I don't know, like Indiana or Illinois, I get a lot of emails, but they got my attention because apparently they work with Marzano, and Marzano is very well thought of in the education world by the educators. So that's always a winner. Around ideas involving community colleges and creating a new pipeline. I have this little email folder, which is ideas for legislation, and I just take these emails and I put them in there because right now I don't have the capacity to think about new bills, and I have to get reelected as well. So there's that idea. There's grow your own. There's we got to do a better job of mentoring our teachers when they start work in their schools. One of the biggest double-edged swords that we have in Maine is that we're a local control state.
Mhm.
And so when I say we need to do a better job with mentoring, in my head, I want them to do it. Just do it. And I want it to be consistent, and I want to have equity and quality, right? So that all schools are equally supportive and welcoming. Um, because I know that there are some schools that do it better than others, and surprise, surprise, the schools that don't do it well have a hard time recruiting.
Mhm.
Um, so, but in order to do that, you have to get 2/3, and I mean 2/3 if we don't fund it, because there's some sort of cost, right, with improving, strengthening mentoring programs.
Mhm.
So we either fund it, which is challenging, or we get 2/3 of each chambers. Um, and then there are all these people who will say, no, no, can't do it. You can't tell my district what to do. They'll do it on their own.
Mm.
So
So
that's a lot.
2/3 of each chamber would need to vote in the affirmative to fund it, or to
No,
ask the local
to
district.
override local control.
I see.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so that would be an uphill battle perhaps.
It is a very large uphill battle. We have overcome it. Um, with suicide prevention, bullying
Mhm.
prevention are recent examples.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so there are times when we can come together. We overcame the teacher salary one because it was in the budget. And you
Mm.
always, unless it's an early budget, it always needs 2/3. So that's a good place to nest things that need 2/3, and is a really important policy initiative.
Mm. So this sounds like an initiative that people could get involved with their local representatives if this is an issue of concern.
Absolutely. Yes. Absolutely. Really ask about the mentoring program, onboarding. Like, you know, now I would say, being a mentor, imagine being an educator in a school, and they want you to mentor somebody. Well, in order for it to be quality, that takes a lot of time and energy. So that comes with cost. So
It does. I have been a mentor to new teachers, and it does. It comes at a cost, either to the mentoring teacher's own students, or not. And so
right.
there's time that needs to be apportioned to it, or it won't
Yeah.
be highest
Well,
quality.
ideally, get a couple. I, I'm now winging it in my head, but here's a thought: you have a program in your school where you rotate in and out master teachers for a couple of years, right? You don't take them out of the classroom forever, but maybe one teacher a year serves as the mentor for whomever the new teachers are for those 2 years, um, and they receive their full salary while they're doing that.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So I'm wondering too. So we have a couple of then issues that people should have on their minds for the future. This teacher salaries, and then also the mentoring. So we're talking really about quality. Really talking about increasing and maintain, or at least maintaining and ever always increasing the quality of the teachers that we have in Maine schools. Is there legislation that already exists that you all have passed that's on the books that's just not being used, that really needs the next step and needs communities to implement this legislation that you've already done the hard work to pass, that would really make a difference in Maine education?
So this gets out to our current endemic environment. So I'm going to go off a little bit to a different tangent. But last year, we passed a bill around indoor air quality because, right? So here you have a pandemic that is airborne, and we're desperate to try to keep our kiddos in their classrooms. Um, and keep them healthy and safe. Well, turns out, our HVAC systems are critical for addressing that issue. And a lot of our schools have pretty old buildings. Some are non-mechanical. Let that sink in. All right.
Wow.
How do you assure indoor air quality when it involves windows and doors? No central HVAC. So it's a big, scary topic because it means, again, money. Um, but when I was researching it, it turns out this has been an issue again for a while for people who are in the know around the impact of a student's experience in the classroom. That
Mm,
if you don't have good air quality, they get sleepy, they could suffer from asthma, et cetera, et cetera. So for me, it's like this is worthy of our attention going forward, should and when we get out of this pandemic. Because frankly, I remember very clearly when my kids were school and we were just doing that round robin of flu and colds,
mhm,
and
mhm,
and wouldn't it be nice if we could, maybe we're not going to be able to eliminate it, but wouldn't it be nice if we could mitigate that to a degree, um, to make those rooms healthier for our kids? So
mhm,
that's a little bit of something, my soapbox on an issue that just got passed. The rules will be coming to us this session. Um, but I would say this does not, right? We're not saying all schools, you must do this tomorrow. But residents and teachers and parents can say, hey, school district, what are you doing? Where are we, how healthy, how unhealthy are there? And it's really easy to figure out if your classrooms are healthy or not. They have these little measurements tools that they can put in the classroom, within minutes they'll know. So this is not an impossible issue to
mhm,
tackle,
mhm.
and I think an important one.
Yeah. I know something that you have mentioned to me in the past is the question of lead in water. And
Gosh,
it, right, what you're saying makes me think immediately of, in the United States, at least, we don't tolerate poor water quality. But it seems, as what we're saying, is that we are willing to tolerate poor air quality in our schools as of the moment.
yeah, well, and we were willing to tolerate poor water quality for a really long time. I mean, it took me 6 years 6 years to pass legislation to reduce the exposure of lead in school drinking water. And, it's going to take time. It was just passed last session. The rules around the limits on what was acceptable and not acceptable and what was the protocol were just passed last session, 6 years later. So again, that's another area I think for folks who are stakeholders to really interact with their school leadership on, is to say, okay, we've got these environmental issues. It's really time to invest.
Hmm, hmm. So the last question I have for you is there anything else that you would like to share with us? Anything I haven't asked that you feel like would be important for people to know about, especially about education in Maine?
Yeah, and I think again, this is probably not going to be new to anybody who's listening to this, but it's an area that we're really struggling with, and that's the mental and emotional health of our students and our educators. It feels bigger than just the education committee, right? We are just so poorly resourced as a society with mental health professionals. And then when you try to talk about that in our schools, it's even worse, because we don't offer competitive pay. And we put our student to professional ratio is insane. And that's on the student side. And then on our educator side, we just keep piling more and more on them with expectations. And now, unfortunately, with a seemingly kind of level of rudeness and disrespect that I just find astounding. Um, so I would love folks to think about that and what can be done in your community to help push back on some of this, because I'm afraid I'm a, I saw a title to an article, and it was just too dispiriting for me to even read. Was something like, "Is this the end of public education?"
Mm, mhm, mhm.
I was
Like
like, "Oh
we
Lord,
need teachers.
maybe,
Yeah.
maybe I don't know." I mean, but we got to fight that because public education is one of the cornerstones of our republic. Yeah, this is really important.
So this is a question then, it sounds like what you're recommending is that people can really maybe even reach out to the people in their school leaders, their own teachers, their children's teachers, to ask this question? Is that something that you think would be useful to start at that really, that kind of
Absolutely. Like
micro level?
invite them into a conversation, and with respect and open ears, because it can be hard to hear sometimes
Mhm,
what they're experiencing on both sides, both students and the educators. Um,
mhm,
the students are really struggling, and they don't struggle the same way, right?
mhm,
So, all those people out there who saying we should just go full remote because we've shown we can do it, and then some kids, kids really loved it. I'm like, no, some kids really loved it. And those are likely the kids who were struggling with the in person for their reasons. And then
mhm,
there are other kids who really need that face one-on-one in-person instruction. Well, so what does that mean? And this is a really good question, Jennifer, that we're walking into now is what what does it look like? I mean, if we're going to recognize that there are kiddos who really do much better at home, how can public schools work with that? Right? I mean,
mhm,
we've been working off of an industrialized model of education for a while. I see that changing.
mhm,
There are definitely pockets around our state and our country that understand that um, our kids are different and they have different needs. And it can be when you have this pressure to keep property taxes low and you
mm,
don't get additional state funding,
mm,
then you're really making it very challenging for our public educators to be innovative, responsive to all children.
mm, mm. Well, thank you very
If you guys
much.
could solve that,
We will get right on
great.
it. Thank you very much.